Hello students and welcome to a very interesting session of EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anuradha Sovani. I am a professor of psychology at SNDT Women's University, and today in this session I am going to walk you through an amazing area of psychology which all of us I am sure are very interested in. And this area is our emotions, the way we feel, the way we react to people. At the end of this session, I think all of you, all the learners will actually be able to look at what really happens to us when we experience our emotions. We'll be able to explain what is meant by emotions. We'll be able to understand what is the physiology of emotions, the bodily changes that are occurring. And then of course, we'll be able to understand behaviorally how we react, what are our different reactions. There'll be theories that are coming up that we will cover in this whole session. Let us look at a commonplace situation. We ask each other, how are you? How are you feeling today? We aren't really asking people about physical health, are we? We are asking, how are you feeling? Are you angry? Are you sad? Are you tired? Are you fed up of the work that you're doing, and so on? And this is the psychology of emotions. What we are looking at here is the process, the changes that is happening inside us to understand our feelings, to be able to get at what these feelings are, where they come from, what sort of interactions are they going to trigger off. Sometimes these emotions can be out of control. Sometimes we try to control them, we try to bring them under our own control. There are situations which trigger this off. Different situations might give rise to different kinds of changes. But bottom line, we are looking at physiological, cognitive and behavioral changes which happen. Let's take a concrete example. You're walking in a forest through a jungle and you encounter a tiger. Imagine what is going to happen to you physiologically, what is going to happen to you emotionally and behaviorally. Your physical reaction is obvious. You're going to be terrified, right? You're going to start trembling, your mouth will go dry, you might scream. So various physiological changes are happening inside you out of sheer fear. So fear is the emotion that we are actually looking at. Behaviorally, what happens? You might start running away, you might startle, you might, like I said, scream. Intellectually or in your mind, cognitively, you're also going through a process where you're trying to analyze what is happening to me right now. All of us may not be very aware of this, but it's happening inside us. So the stimulus, the tiger, is setting off certain thoughts in our minds. It's setting off certain physiological reactions in our body, and it's setting off certain kinds of actions, certain kinds of behaviors. What we're trying to explore here is how different emotions, different kinds of feelings give rise to different physiological reactions, give rise to different cognitive changes, thought changes, and give rise to certain behavioral changes, certain ways in which we manifest these emotions. We may be unaware of this, we may be aware of this. That is really what this lesson plans to convey to you. Since reactions to the situation or to a stimulus can differ, can be different in different people, it will again have different components. Once again, people might react differently physiologically, emotionally and behaviorally depending on your personality, depending on your past experience. Different brain areas are responsible for these emotional experiences. Let us talk about what really happens in a very general nature. What are the characteristics of emotions? That is first what we are going to cover, the nature of emotions. Emotions have been defined by various psychologists. You have Plutchik, one of the psychologists, Strongman, another one who defined emotions, who provided different definitions. There are certain common elements in all these definitions. They talk about the feeling level, they talk about the physiological reactions, as I said earlier, they talk about thought changes and behavioral changes. O'Connor and other psychologists have tried to reduce down to common emotions. What are the common emotions that we experience? This can be cross-cultural, this can happen across different countries. They can be positive emotions and negative emotions. Paul Ekman conducted a lot of research and tried to find out what are some of these universal emotions, these common emotions. anger, surprise, disgust, sadness. These were emotions which are experienced by all humans in all different cultural settings. These are therefore universal emotions. They can happen across cultures. So what are the characteristics of these emotions? What are the characteristics that these emotions share? These are universal, as we said. So what would happen is a certain particular facial reaction would happen common across these emotions. Certain behavioral changes, certain physiological changes would be again common how these emotions are expressed. So Ekman talked about how exactly at different parts of the brain, the hippocampus, the amygdala, what are these different changes that happen, and therefore culturally how these manifest. Now, there may be certain culturally accepted and not accepted behaviors. For example, you may not wink, while talking to certain people in certain cultures. You might raise your eyebrows, you might make your eyes big to show anger. You may not do that with certain people. There would also be gender differences. Certain things would be expected of women, not expected of women, expected of men, not expected of men. So how we display these emotions would also differ across different cultures. So all this is influenced by different parts of our brain, different structures in our brain which we are going to talk about. And as we have just said, it will also be influenced by the culture in which you are brought up. So let us look at all these different elements. How do you show that you are angry? How do you differ in different cultures when these moods change and when you want to manifest these different moods to the person who is across from you? For example, if you have a stray dog that you encounter, some people may be very afraid of this animal, and so they may react in a certain way. So what we are going to cover now in the next section is we are going to look at which of these emotions are innate, are they inborn, which of these emotions are learned, which are taught to you. Okay? So studies have shown us this, that very often it's possible that you might have actually picked up certain emotional manifestations because you have watched other people display these emotions and you have picked up from that, whereas as we said earlier, some are innate. Why do we need emotions? Look at this. According to various researchers, like according to Darwin for example, emotions have survival value. Emotions help us to actually save ourselves, protect ourselves. Emotions help us to feel attracted to other people, to reproduce, to have children. Emotions help us to manifest how we are feeling to other people so that other people understand and react to us in appropriate ways. So emotions are helpful, emotions are adaptive. Darwin actually told us how the species can survive because of emotions. So that is a very important theory in the background when we are looking at anger, fear, sexual attraction, number of things. Let us understand what is the physiology of emotions, what happens inside our brain, what actually occurs in different parts of the brain when we start manifesting different emotions. This may not be available to us, this may not be known to us, we may not really understand this while observing ourselves, but we must know what is actually happening. Now in the brain there are various sections, and let's take an example. There is this girl, she's hurt, she's feeling sad, somebody has scolded her in class or a friend has been insulting to her, and she walks away and she has tears running down her cheeks. Her body is reacting to the fact that she is sad, she is angry, she's feeling insulted. These bodily reactions also give us an understanding of feelings. She may turn around, she may walk away, may not look at her friend. So we know that she is experiencing these emotions because of changes in the autonomic nervous system. There are two branches of the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The autonomic nervous system triggers off what we call the fight or flight reaction in the human being. As I said, Darwin said this is very useful. You see a stressor, you see a tiger, you see a wild animal, you see a stray dog, you might fight or you might flee. The autonomic nervous system it helps us to respond to different emotions. How does it do this? There is increased heartbeat, there is faster palpitations, there may be actually pupillary dilation. Different glands in the body would start reacting. The adrenal glands, which are situated about the kidneys, they would start reacting. If we go back to the example that we had earlier of a wild animal, you will be able to understand how all this happens. Epinephrine, which is a substance which is released by the adrenal gland, which actually temporarily stops or decreases certain functions of the body and increases the fight or flight reactions of the body. That is what secretes at that point, and then we encounter this threat-like situation, this threatening situation, by either fighting back or by running away. As I said, the heart rate will then slowly, after the fear situation is over, it will slowly come back to normal, and then we will have other bodily reactions starting. Pupillary dilation may come back to normal. The limbic system reacts, the cerebral cortex reacts, the various parts of the brain like the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the hippocampus, all of them react. How does the hippocampus and the hypothalamus and these different structures of the brain, how are they actually playing a role? So, we need to define all these different parts of the brain and the role that they play. The thalamus, for example, is like a relay station. It actually passes messages. It passes messages to the thalamus, from the thalamus to the hypothalamus. It helps us to react to these emotional experiences that we have in our environment. The hippocampus, on the other hand, has a memory domain. It has a memory function. So, sometimes it would trigger off various past memories of that fearful situation which have arisen. So, you see that the autonomic nervous system response of fight or flight is actually a very regulatory kind of response. It actually helps epinephrine and non-epinephrine to be released. It helps the hippocampus to sort of revive short-term memories of scary events, sad events, angry making events, other kind of emotionally arousing events in the past. And then you have the various neurotransmitters which help you react to this behaviorally. So, for example, if say your friends have thrown a surprise party for you and you walked in and you kind of feel very happy, and people are clapping and singing for you. Or if you have had some unpleasant experience of being bitten by a bug or by an insect, and or you've been afraid because of a dog, and all these memories are stored in your hippocampus. And because of this, your emotional reactions get regulated, and you might actually choose to avoid certain situations. You might see the stray dog and not walk into that area. Or you might see a lizard or a cockroach in a room, and if you're afraid, you might not go there at all. So aggression, anxiety, all these are stimulated by the amygdala. And this is the part of the brain which is very important in triggering off emotions. The amygdala in animals has, or if it is destroyed, has led to a syndrome which is called the Kluver-Bucy syndrome. This is a reaction that happens in abnormal situations where there is hypersexuality, where behavior of the animal may change because of damage to the brain, to that particular part of the brain. Another area which we are also looking at is the role of the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. So, how really is emotional experience manifested because of the role played by these two hemispheres of our brain, the left hemisphere, which handles certain functions such as language functions and so on, and the right hemisphere, which understands or deals more with non-verbal, with more visual kind of stimuli. So, if you take an EEG, if you take an electroencephalographic recording, you will actually understand how different parts of the brain, the left and the right hemisphere, are playing a role. When certain parts get amputated, when certain parts get affected because of, say, epilepsy, if the EEG is showing that there is abnormal EEG in particular parts of the brain, you are going to be seeing different changes in the emotional manifestations of how these person actually react to emotions. What really happens in this fight or flight activity, how this whole circuit right from the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the hippocampus, the adrenal secretions, the fight or flight response. This is what you try and understand through different examples when you study emotions. Like in the case of Sonal, let us take an example of a student that we are just looking at right now, and she has had a tiff with her friend. The friend has been nasty to her, there are angry expressions exchanged. There is a hippocampal memory trace of somebody, the way they have behaved with you before. And so you might, as I said earlier, just turn away. You interpret that this person is not being nice to you. You interpret, and your ANS of course releases at the same time adrenaline, so you're feeling aroused, you're feeling angry, you're feeling irritated. Once she has interacted with the friend, once say Sonal has interacted with Meenal and they have understood what really is happening over here, then she starts feeling different emotions. She says, you know, I'm getting blamed for things which I have not done. She feels insulted, she feels hurt, she feels unjust treatment has been given to her by Meenal. So friends, you actually see here how emotions are so complex. Let us look at now some of the theories behind these emotions. These theories have actually emerged over time. So the initial theories emphasize the role of the autonomic nervous system, how the constitution of the body, how the behavioral responses are interpreted or changed because of certain bodily reactions. So physiological arousal theories were the first theories which came up, the James-Lange theories. So William James and Charles Lange prepared this theory where they told us that when an emotional situation arises, there is an interpretation of the bodily response that we are giving, right? So as I said, the heart beating fast, the blood pumping through the heart, if we start shivering, if our limbs start trembling, and all these reactions we actually interpret. And then we say, looks like I'm experiencing an emotion of fear. So according to this theory, the physiological changes in the body actually triggered off a physiological response which I now study, and then my emotion is manifest and I interpret that I'm crying, therefore I guess I'm sad, I'm trembling, therefore I guess I'm afraid. The Cannon-Bard theory, which was another theory that came up a little later, made a slight change in the way this was perceived. So the Cannon-Bard theory, where Cannon and Bard interpreted physiological emotions, at the same time we are also looking at the thoughts that are happening in our minds simultaneously. So we are saying that there are physiological changes, the ANS is bringing about certain physiological changes, it's bringing about all the changes I talked about. So if there's fear, there is trembling, there is sweating, there is a tendency to scream, to run. And at the same time, we are also experiencing the thoughts that say, oh my God, this is a wild animal, it's going to do something to me. So this is the kind of hypothesis that Cannon-Bard put forward. In this theory, they said it is not just interpretation of the physical changes. At the same time, the ANS response is occurring, and at the same time, the response is also happening where I am processing my information at the thalamus simultaneously in the cortex. So the thalamus is processing one part of the data, the cortex is processing the other part of the data. So this theory is actually talking about both these processes happening at the same time. So using these examples, you will understand how different theories are actually showing how that reaction to the tiger changes, okay, or is interpreted in a different way when you are looking at it through the lens of these different theories. So if it's the James-Lange theory, you are looking at it differently. If it's the Cannon-Bard theory, you are looking at it differently. This did not end there. There were other theories that came up of how the thalamus and how the cortex has a role to play. So you're looking at a situation, for example, when there is a fearful event, the ANS response, heart beating fast, shivering, the emotional experience linked to the physiological arousal, the simultaneous and independent interpretation of what is happening in our cortex, correct? So what happens then is that we have other researchers who are talking about more ways in which cognition steps in. And now you have this theory which is called the cognitive appraisal theory, right? This is a very interesting theory. Now here what happens is that this is an alternative explanation for something that we have been looking at up till now, where you are experiencing the emotion, the ANS is triggering off all these responses which are also being cognitively appraised at the same time. So I say, oh my God, I am really terrified, like my heart is beating double fast. At the same time, I am also cognitively appraising my reactions about how I am feeling, how I am thinking, what are the thoughts, what are the memories that are coming up in my mind. So in this theory, the cognitive appraisal theory, you are simultaneously appraising different stimuli, interpreting different stimuli, the threatening experience that you are facing, how you are feeling, how your heart is reacting, how your body is reacting, both are interpreted at the same time, and it's like a holistic understanding of the whole situation, right? So here what you have is theorists like Schachter and Singer, who actually said or emphasized that these interpretations of stimuli coming from the ANS and coming from the cortical areas are actually processed at the same time. And that is how we understand emotions. That is how we interpret emotion. That is how we interpret the event which has taken place in us around, right? So the basic premise that there are physiological arousal, there is emotional reaction, but each of these theories is linking it in a different way. Some theories are putting the physiology first, some theories are putting the cognition first or putting both simultaneously. Some theories are looking at the appraisal of both. So maybe you will actually have to read this very carefully to understand how this works, how these different theories are coming up one after the other, and we can use a number of different examples to understand this. We can use examples where there is love as the emotion which is experienced. We already took examples of fear, of sadness, of feeling insulted. So the labeling that we actually give these emotions, that is what each of these theories is interpreting in a slightly different way. And that is what makes us uniquely human, how we interpret these things. Now experiments were conducted on college students in which they actually explored this. So what they tried to find out was, when college students are getting certain kind of experiences physiologically because of certain vitamins or certain substances which were given to them, because of which epinephrine got triggered off and the ANS started reacting. So in this experiment, they actually kind of interpreted this ANS change, this epinephrine change, as arousal, and then they attributed that arousal to certain emotional experiences. So the group that expressed that they were feeling, say, happy, or another group experienced that they were feeling angry, they actually attributed that emotion not to the drug, not to the substance that was given to them, but to their own experience. And those who knew that it was arising from the drug, they understood that it was the influence of the drug, so they would not interpret it as any kind of emotional arousal. So the attribution to that situation is what actually changes how you perceive a threat or how you perceive the situation around you, what meaning you attribute. One of the most recent theories that has come up is Lazarus's cognitive appraisal theory. Here what are they saying? They are saying that the experience of emotional arousal is actually arising from the cognitive appraisal of an evaluation of the stimulus. Okay? So you are weighing it. You are weighing it in the light of your cultural background, in the light of your past experiences, and you are actually attributing a positive or a negative meaning to whatever physiological changes, whatever emotional changes are happening inside you. So this is a very interesting theory in which you are actually adding on the cultural experiences, your past background, your social kind of experiences with other people, weighing that into the event, appraising what is happening physiologically to you because of changes in your amygdala, because of secretion of epinephrine, norepinephrine. And so you are putting together these physiological, these cognitive, you are appraising all these and you are making sense of them. So this is another very, very interesting theory which I wanted to introduce to you. Now we come to a very interesting another area where you are looking at disorders of emotions. See, all this time we were talking about normal emotions, how you and I experience them in normal day-to-day life situations. But sometimes, friends, emotions can become maladaptive. disorders of emotions can arise and a person can start experiencing some maladaptive emotion in excess. This may hamper the way they function, the way they interact with their environment, the way they are able to carry out their social emotional functioning. There may be a depressive disorder where a person feels very, very low. There may be an anxiety disorder where they may worry excessively for no rhyme or reason. Too much of worry is seen, too much of anxiety is seen in these situations. I am sure some of you as students have gone through this: exam stress, worry about public speaking, standing up on stage and saying certain things. So I am sure we identify. Anxiety disorders can be of many types. You can have a generalized anxiety disorder, there can be phobic disorders, panic disorders. You might have friends who have suffered from obsessive compulsive disorders. So anxiety disorders, although they arise from one emotion, anxiety, actually have a very wide spectrum and multiple ways in which they can be manifest. Of course, one has to help these people. One has to understand what they are going through and try and help them. Perhaps something has occurred in their lifetime which has triggered off this emotion. Perhaps some internal changes are happening because of which they are facing this disorder. So as I gave you examples, anxiety disorders, depressive disorders can arise linked to some kind of a stressful event, can arise because of internal physiological changes, but the person would need time to be able to come out of this, to be able to put their life back on par, be able to deal with their daily life circumstances in spite of this emotional episode that has arisen. We also want to look at the fact that emotions need not be only in this depressive, sad spectrum. You can also have bipolar disorders. You can have people who are, extremely excited, extremely happy, extremely elevated mood a long time, suddenly, alternating with crying, with depression. So these are some of the disturbed emotional conditions which might affect an individual. They may need medication, they may need therapy, different kinds of therapy is available. There is cognitive behavioral therapy which can be given. There can be client-centered therapy which can be given for mood disorders. And basically what you need in this situation is trying to help the person to overcome that particular emotional situation, both with pharmacotherapy, pharmacology and with psychotherapy, and be able to get them to come out of that situation, come back to their normal lives, deal with the situation in their lives. Students, I have taken you through quite a world of emotions, I think. It's very exciting even for me to tell you about this, how emotions happen, how they are cross-cultural, how they can be universal. Different theories of emotions, how theorists, scientists have tried to understand how emotions happen. What happens to our body? What happens to our thoughts? What happens to our behavior? These are some of the things that we have tried to walk through. We have also tried to understand how emotions can get disordered and a person can have trouble, and we as psychologists and all of us in the community, you, me, all of us, are trying to destigmatize this, trying to make us understand that it's not abnormal to have an emotional disturbance. It's fine, you can go and approach somebody and seek help. So thank you very much for being with me through this episode. As I said, I'm Dr. Anuradha Sovni. I'm a professor of psychology at SNDT Women's University, Mumbai, and it has been a great pleasure interacting with all of you. It's not really an interaction because you're watching me, but now you will do your MCQs, you will try to solve the questions, you will read the references that we have given you. So I hope you enjoy this journey, trying to understand through EPG Pathshala what emotions actually are, and what they do to you, and how they help you and how they can harm you. Thank you very much for being with me through this episode.